Hello! Today we are going to be tier ranking all 28 Magic Treehouse books. So for those who don't know, all the Magic Treehouse books are broken into three separate categories. You have the original 28, you have the Merlin missions, which are a series aimed at older children, and then you have the revamped series, which started in 2017. So the original series was written by Mary Pope Osborne starting in around 1992. She wrote 28 total books over the course of about 10 years, and they're mainly aimed at children. So for a little background on this series, here's how they usually go. We start with Jack and Annie, two children who live in Pennsylvania. They went to the forest one day and found a treehouse. Once they climbed the ladder, they found a huge library in it. They soon discover that you can actually teleport by wishing to go somewhere. So if you hold up a book and say, "I wish to go here," you will teleport to the time and place where that book is writing about. They soon discover that the library is owned by Morgan Le Fay. She is a sorceress who lives in Camelot and uses the treehouse to find books or scrolls that she may not be able to find because they no longer exist, or they were ruined because of something that happened in that time period. So she uses it to try to collect rare books. And now where Jack and Annie come into this is Morgan Le Fay tasks them with finding these books. Sometimes they just try to find a book out of their collection, or sometimes they try to find sayings to undo a spell, such as a time when Morgan's assistant was turned into a dog and they had to find 4 sayings to undo it. So going back to that 4, all of these books are organized into 4 book arcs. All 4 of the books in an arc have basically the same overarching story. They're trying to find 4 sayings to undo a spell, or they're trying to find 4 objects so they could learn some moral lesson. Once they have all 4 objects in the 4th book, we find the payoff and how they all connect, and then we move on to the next arc. Alright, before we get into the ranking, let's first talk about the tier categories. Our top one is going to be peak nostalgia, whimsical magic school bus vibes. These are books that are either hilarious or very much fun, happy, wholesome books that I really enjoyed. Our second category is going to be good enough to make me forget it's a children's book. It's going to be books that I, as a now adult, actually enjoyed and had a good time reading, either because they're funny, had a good plot, or a good meaning, or something like that. Our middle category is just going to be okay. I probably liked it as a kid, but it's really not something I would read again now. And then going down to our second to last, we have books that I basically got nothing out of, that are just kind of slop or I didn't really enjoy and just wanted to get to the end of. And finally, we have books that are so boring that I almost stopped reading this series totally. They were ones that nothing happened, they were not interesting, or it was just boring. Now that we know what the categories are, we can get into the ranking. Alright, so let's get started. The first book in this series is Dinosaurs Before Dark. This one takes them to the Cretaceous period, where right as they arrive, they see a pterodon looking at them through the treehouse window. They climb down, they run into a couple of dinosaurs like a Triceratops, a few more pterodons, and at the end, a T-Rex. The T-Rex notices them and chases them all the way back to the treehouse, but not before Jack decides now is a perfect time to start reading his book about T-Rexes, which is just kind of insane in my opinion, but here we are. During their adventure, they came across a gold medallion with the letter M on, and since we don't know Morgan Le Fay yet, this is setting up a nice mystery that's going to go through the next couple books. This one was actually pretty entertaining, not the best. I used to be a dinosaur kid, so I instantly loved these kind of books. So yeah, it was pretty good. Next, we have The Night at Dawn. This one brings them to a medieval castle where they go in and immediately get captured by some of the knights there. Annie decides that the best way to get out of the jail they've been put in is to wave her flashlight around like a wand, and for some reason, that scares the jailers so much that they run away and drop the keys. They get out of the jail, swim through the moat, and run away. This one was honestly not very entertaining. Nothing much happened other than her waving her flashlight around like she's going to cast a spell on them. So I'm probably going to put this in. I just really didn't get much out of it. Next we have Mummies in the Morning. This one takes place in ancient Egypt, where as soon as they get out of the treehouse, they see a pyramid and start heading right towards it. Once they get into the period, they run across a ghost named Tutepi, who is short-sighted. Not really sure how that works, but that's what we're dealing with. She's not able to pass on because she couldn't find the Book of the Dead, probably because of her short-sightedness. So Jack and Annie help her find the Book of the Dead and bring it back to her mummy where she is able to pass on. But on the way out, they aren't able to find the way out, but then a cat runs through, presumably brought there by Hutepi, and they're able to find their way out and get back to Pennsylvania. This one was okay. It was a little bit better than Knights of the Dawn because some things happened, and the short-sighted ghost is kind of ridiculous, so I'll say it was okay. Just fine. Next, we have Pirates Past Noon. This one takes them to an island where they see on the horizon some pirates coming, and although they try to escape, they're obviously just children, and they are captured. But before they're captured, Jack falls and drops his glasses, and I can't show the picture to you, but he literally looks exactly like Velma, just waving his hands around and trying to find it, which is ridiculous. The pirates then try to loot the treehouse, but they call it vile booty because all there is in books, and none of them can read. So Jack and Annie are then brought onto the ship, and they strike a bargain with the captain. He will let them free if they can read the map, because none of them can read, and find where the treasure is. They figure it out, they go back to the island, which is shaped like a whale, and as they're digging up the treasure, a storm comes. And two of the captain's men run away because they're scared, and because he doesn't want them to leave him on the island, the captain goes with them, leaving Jack and Annie to escape. This one was genuinely hilarious, I think pretty unintentionally. Him calling it vile booty, along with just some of the pictures in it, made this probably one of my favorites so far. It was just very insane and funny. Next, we have Night of the Ninjas, which takes place in ancient Japan. This arc starts with Morgan Le Fay being put under a spell, and the only way to fix it is for them to find 4 objects, the first of which is in Japan. So as soon as they leave the house, they are immediately caught by 2 ninjas who, although they don't know the object they're looking for, takes them to the ninja master who might. He refuses to help them, but leaves them with some words of wisdom. Use nature, be nature, follow nature. They take this pretty literally, and on their way back, they do 3 things which are actually insane. First, they don't know where they're going, so they use a stick and the sun to find the directions, doing the first one. Then, they see a samurai up on the cliff, and rather than deciding to hide, they feel their best solution is to pretend to be a rock, which somehow works, so good for them. And finally, they're trying to cross a river on the way back, but the only way there is a tiny branch. So rather than trying to find another way, they decide the best thing they can do is to squeak and tiptoe like a mouse and get across, which of course works. So this is another one that was just actually insane and hilarious, and I enjoyed it a lot more than I probably should have. Next, we have Afternoon on the Amazon. This one obviously takes place in the Amazon. As soon as they get there, they walk a little bit and find a boat on the river, and being naturally stupid, they decide to get into the boat. While they're going down the boat, they have a couple problems. Jack tries to grab a branch, which turns out to be a snake, which is insanely terrifying. And they have a monkey that starts throwing fruit at them. But naturally, one of the fruit is, of course, one of the objects they need. Once they have the fruit, they head back. And at the end, they have a nice little message about respecting nature and not being too much of a hater because they're just animals. Next, we have Sunset of the Sabertooth. This one takes place in the Ice Age. One of the first things they do is they realize it's actually really cold, so they find a little cave and immediately steal people's clothes. Not what I would do in this situation, but when they leave the cave, they find one of the inhabitants, and instead of being mad at them, he gives them a mammoth flute, and they decide this is one of the objects they need, so they start heading home. But on the way there, a Sabertooth starts stalking them, and they decide that they should blow the magical flute they have. And of course, this freezes it completely still, and they are able to escape back to Pennsylvania. This is another one that wasn't one of my favorites, but it was okay. Wasn't the best. Now we get to Midnight on the Moon. This one takes place on the moon in the year 2031, because back when she wrote this, she thought we would have space stations on the moon. But I really do not think we're going to have that in 7 years, so I'm glad she's optimistic. They start inside a space station and grab some space chutes that will allow them to go outside for about 2 hours. This sets a nice little timelet thing where they're constantly worried about not going too far so they can make it back in time. They find a buggy and take it all the way to the site where the American flag is placed on the moon, and an astronaut comes up to them and gives them a star map. They find out this is the object they need and head all the way back within the time limit and make it back to Pennsylvania. This one was actually really fun. I like the time limit aspect of it. It made it feel like there's some stakes, and I really enjoyed that part of it. Alright, the next book in the series is Dolphins at Daybreak. This one takes place in the ocean, and as soon as they get out of the treehouse, they find a sub conveniently lying on the beach. They take that sub and go underwater. And basically, the only thing of note that happened is that they find an arduous down there, which grabs all around the sub and crushes it as they start going up. The sub starts cracking, and they have to swim out of the sub and swim all the way back to shore with the help of some dolphins. Although that might sound interesting, it was not at all. It was probably one of the most boring ones to date and might be the most boring one in the series. It's basically just a whole lot of nothing. So yeah, I almost stopped reading it just because it was so nothing was happening. And then that brings us to Ghost Town at Sundown. This one occurs in a Wild West prairie town where as soon as they get there, they see a group of cowboys carrying a young horse that's been separated from its mom. They have bad vibes or an evil aura, so they immediately know that they're evil and decide that they want to help them. Conveniently, another cowboy called Slim comes in and says, yeah, we'll help you go get that young horse and reunite it with its mom. So of course they go into the town, get the horse out, and race all the way back to a canyon where they agreed to meet beforehand. They reunite with his mom, which is actually pretty sweet. And while they're talking with Slim, said he's always wanted to write a book about his experiences, and Annie convinces him to do so, which just conveniently is actually the book that they wished on to get into the Wild West Prairie. So I thought that was actually pretty neat. Say that this one was actually pretty entertaining. It was just okay though, nothing spectacular. But I did really like the book aspect of him writing it. So the next book in the series is Lions at Lunchtime. This one takes place somewhere in Africa, but they never actually specify. Right when they come out, they see a big river where some wildebeest are trying to cross. Annie obviously runs right away to try to help them steer clear of any mud and make sure they get across. While she's trying to help them, she actually falls into the mud herself, and Jack has to try to help her get out, which actually was not a bad scene. On the way back, they run across a beehive, and Annie decides to stick her finger in it for some reason. Once they make it back to the treehouse, they realize there are some lions there, and they avoid them by staying under a giraffe's legs, and finally make it up to the treehouse and back home. This one was also really boring. Not much of anything happened other than her sticking her hand in a beehive for some reason. I would not do that personally, but... Now we have Polar Bears Past Bedtime. This one takes place in the Arctic, and as soon as they get there, they meet a seal hunter. He brings them some nice clothes and brings them back to his house. Right outside, they see two polar bear cubs, and Annie decides to start playing with them, which is honestly an insane thing to do because you know their mom is going to be right there, and polar bears are terrifying. But she ignores that, and they find themselves on some thin ice that starts cracking. The young polar bears start basically crawling on their belly, which allows them to get off without being hurt. Annie and Jack do the same thing and escape back home safely. This is another one where it just wasn't very interesting, so I didn't really get much out of it. Now we have Vacation Under a Volcano. This would occur in Pompeii in the year 79 CE. As they enter the town, they see an old, crotchety woman who starts yelling at them, "The end is near," very ominously, which obviously scares Jack and Annie, but once they get up to her, they realize that she's actually pretty sweet. And they ask her where to find the book they're looking for. She tells them where it is, and as they grab the book and leave, the volcano starts to erupt. This starts an actually pretty fun scene where they are having to run away before the volcano gets near them and realizing that they're actually in a lot of trouble. Just as they're almost back to the treehouse, they come across a broken bridge with no obvious way to get across it. This terrifies them before Hercules picks them up and brings them across the bridge, and they're able to make it back. I enjoyed this one a lot. The old woman added a lot of foreshadowing, and you felt like something bad was going to happen the whole time. So this is definitely one of the better ones so far. There's a pretty good storyline through the whole thing, and I really enjoyed it. Now we have Day of the Dragon King. This one has them going to ancient China, and they find themselves getting in the back of a covered ox cart with a man bringing them to the city. Although he notices them pretty early and tells them that they're going through a big problem with book burnings and goes on a huge rant about how bad they are, which, good for you. But unfortunately, the book they're looking for is about to be burnt in the library next, which is very Fahrenheit 451, but they're able to grab the book and run away as the guards start shooting at them, which is kind of insane for a children's series. This one was pretty interesting. I like to talk about book burnings because book bannings are something that's happening pretty recently, and apparently it's always been an issue, so I will put this and probably enjoyed it a lot as a kid. Now we get to Viking ships at sunrise. This one takes them to ancient Ireland where they quickly find a man named Brother Patrick who takes them to their monastery. They quickly find the book they're looking for, although it's not finished, so he won't give it to them yet. As they start to leave, they realize some Vikings are coming and they rush back in. The person working on the book would rather have an incomplete work be published than nothing at all, which is kind of raw, and decides to give them the book. As they leave, though, they find the Vikings upon them and decide to hide in a ship. The ship then slips off the beach and they realize they're in the middle of the ocean with a storm brewing. They get lost in the storm, but before they know it, a giant sea serpent comes out of nowhere and pushes them to shore. This is kind of insane if you compare it with the rest of the books because nothing like that mystical and magical has happened before. But I did really enjoy it and they were able to escape with the book. This one is also really amazing. I really enjoyed the monastery and the talks with the monks, and I really enjoyed the sea serpent section. Now we have Hour of the Olympics. This one obviously takes place in Greece at the site of one of the first Olympics. One of the first people they find is Plato, of all people, and he tells them that he knows the book they're looking for. Although the book was written by a woman who goes under anonymous because women are not respected enough to publish books in this time. So now obviously since they're at the Olympics, they want to go to it. But only Jack is allowed to go because Annie is a woman and they're not allowed to go in there. So Jack ditches her and decides to go anyway. But of course, Annie arrives at the Olympics dressed as a soldier, so they won't know that she's a woman. But of course, since she's still like an 8-year-old, they find her and kick her out. But right as the soldiers are dragging her off, Pegasus comes and swoops both of them back to the treehouse. So I will say this one is pretty good. I really wish they talked more about how women were not allowed to do things in that time. They basically just mention it. They never really admonish it or talk about how that's not exactly a good thing. I would say I really didn't get much out of it. The next book is Tonight on the Titanic, which obviously takes place on the Titanic. The treehouse appears at the front of the ship and they immediately go inside. As soon as they get there, they hit the iceberg and they realize something's not wrong. They read about the book that says that a lot of people on the lower decks weren't able to make it out. They immediately head there to help as many people as they can. They find 2 children and guide them up to the top floor for the life rafts. Once they're in the life rafts, they realize that the ship is tilting pretty bad and need to get to the treehouse as soon as they can. So they race back to the treehouse and they're able to escape right before the ship goes under. This one was pretty exciting. I really liked that you're basically in danger the whole time and you're trying to rescue these children while still making it back safely. So I actually really did enjoy this one. Alright, next we have Buffalo Before Breakfast. This one takes place in the Great Plains, but before any white settlers have appeared. They meet a Lakota boy who takes them to see some buffalo. Of course, they got too close and the buffalo start getting in a stampede, but Annie is able to calm them down somehow. Not really sure how that works. They then return to the tribe and are given a feather and returned home. This one really didn't have much going on. Simple plot, not very many characters, and nothing really interesting happens. Next, we have Tigers at Twilight. This one occurs in a jungle, but in India. When they get there, they're in the trees and meet some monkeys who are swinging from vine to vine. They realize that a python is coming up one of the trees, so the only way to escape is for them to go from vine to vine. Kind of like Tarzan. Not really sure how they were able to do that as children, but okay. Once they're at a safe distance, they hop on an elephant's back, which takes them to a stream. At the stream, they see a tiger who is stuck in a hunter's trap. The tiger is sleeping, so they feel safe enough to go and take the trap off his paw. But then, obviously, it's a tiger, so it starts growling and chasing them, but they're able to escape. They find an old man who gives them a flower, and when they tell them about the tiger, he says its beauty cannot live without its ugliness, which is kind of an insane line for a children's book. So yeah, this one is honestly just another standard animal jungle story. I did like some of the lines, and it was kind of one of the most insane ones, but I'll say it was okay. So next, we go to Australia for Dingoes at Dinner Time. Once they leave the treehouse, they come across a couple animals like an emu, a koala, and a kangaroo with a baby. As soon as they start playing with some of the animals, 3 dingoes come around and scare away the mom, leaving the baby there. And of course, that's not enough, so a fire starts and they all have to run away. Annie grabs the koala and find a cave nearby where they can wait out the fire. As soon as it's over, they go back to the spot of the baby and wait for its mother to return, which it does. But yeah, this one was, again, more wholesome animal stories. I really do eat them up. And I did enjoy it. The kangaroo interactions were really fun, and I did like that she went back for the koala. So I'm going to say that I really did enjoy this one, put it pretty high. And now we're getting to a weird 3-book section where she decides to stop using times of day and use actual days for the title of her books. So the first one in this weird section is Civil War on Sunday. This one obviously takes us to the Civil War. The first thing they do is they find a camp and they go to a field hospital. They found Clara Barton, which takes them close to the front line so they can find wounded soldiers, help them, and bring them back. One of the people they find, John, is suffering from heat stroke. They try to cool him down and bring him back to the field hospital. Once they know he's okay, they leave for home. I feel like this would probably be extremely traumatizing for children in real life, so it's kind of hilarious that they only made the boy have heat stroke instead of some other serious injuries he'd probably have in real life, but that's fine. I'll say this one again is probably just okay. Didn't get too much out of it. Our next book is Revolutionary War on Wednesday. This one, of course, happens during the American Revolutionary War. They start on the shores of the Delaware River and immediately find a camp of patriots having a meeting with their captain. This captain is, of course, George Washington. They go and listen to his speech. Once they know the plan, which is to cross the Delaware River, they secretly get in one of the boats and go with him. George Washington discovers them halfway and tells them they're going right back when they get across the river. Once they are there, George Washington expresses some doubt about his attack plan and, insanely, needs 2 children to convince him that this is a good plan of attack. Which means that, canonically, Jack and Annie are one of the reasons that Americans won the Revolutionary War, which is kind of insane. But yeah, I just kind of like this one just for the sheer nerve to have Jack and Annie talk to George Washington, and it was pretty entertaining, so I will also put it in the top tier. Now we have Twister on Tuesday, which takes place in the prairie after white settlers have come. This one is about tornadoes, and as someone who grew up in Oklahoma, hits a little too close to home. So once they make it to the prairie, they quickly find a dugout home, which is being used as a 1-room schoolhouse. They go into the room, talk to some of the teachers, some of the children, really not that interesting. And as they leave, they realize that a tornado is on the horizon and headed right towards them. They know that the school just started, so they don't know where the cellar is, so they head back to tell people where the cellar and the dugout is, and they all go down there and wait out the storm safely. Once everything's fine, they talk to the children some more and go home. This one really was not that interesting as well, just a lot of boring dialogue that frankly I didn't care much about, so yeah, I didn't really get much out of it. Now we have Earthquake in the Early Morning, which takes us to California in 1906, right before an earthquake strikes. So of course, as soon as they get there, the earthquake hits home and rips up the road they're on and destroys some buildings around them. They try to help a reporter and a librarian, but once they start reading their research book, they realize that the librarian actually caused him to lose all his books because the building he went to burned down. This causes Jack to start crying hysterically and freaking out, just imagining the loss of all those books, which is kind of insane because I'm sure there's a ton of actual dead people around them because of the huge earthquake, but no one cares about them. This one was pretty silly with the whole librarian thing, so it was okay. I probably would have loved it as a kid, but not so much now. So now we're going back to Times of Day. Stage fright on a summer night. This one takes place in England in the 1600s. As soon as they get there, they cross the London Bridge and arrive at the Globe Theatre where they meet Will, who's obviously William Shakespeare. He finds out that they can read because they were reading some of the signs and decides to have them join the play. They get into the costume, they do their parts, but since Jack goes last, Annie has some time to escape. She does this because when they were coming in, they saw a bear named Dan the Dancing Bear who was stuck in a cage to be used for entertainment. Obviously, Annie hates this, so she goes and tries to break the bear out of bear jail. Obviously, Annie is not able to do this, but Will sees this and decides he'll buy the bear. So now I guess William Shakespeare owns a bear in this series, and I'm sure that's not dangerous or stupid at all. Yeah, I actually loved the Dan the Dancing Bear plotline, along with them reading. It was kind of hilarious, so I actually did enjoy this book. And now we have our last animal-themed book, Good Morning Gorilla. This one takes place in the African rainforest where, as they're walking along, they come across a young gorilla. They start playing with it, but a heavy storm comes out of nowhere and Jack is separated from the gorilla and from Annie. He has to wait for the storm to go out, and in the morning, he walks around trying to find her. He finds her sleeping with a group of gorillas, and as he tries to approach her, the leader of the gorillas, the silverback, starts snarling and doesn't let him get close. He read in his book that the best way to deal with gorillas is to act like one, so naturally he gets on all fours, starts growling, and tries to slowly get his way towards Annie, and because this is a children's book, that miraculously works and he's able to wake her up. Once they're awake, Annie tells him that the gorillas are actually really nice, so they spend some time with them and find out they can communicate using sign language. Once they have their fill, Jack and Annie go back home, and as they are leaving, they sign "I love you" to each other, which is actually really sweet, and I kind of am obsessed with it. But yeah, I really loved the getting lost in the rainforest section. It was pretty well written, and I really loved the sign language and the talking to the gorillas. It was just really sweet, so immediately one of the best books in the series. Now we go to our last day-themed book, Thanksgiving and Thursday. This one takes place in Plymouth around the first Thanksgiving. Jack and Annie walk up to the spot of the festivities and realize they don't have any food. So someone tells them to try to go catch some eels and clams, which of course they are not able to do, and they get all wet in the river. So when they could not, a young woman finds them and tells them to dry off and come help her making her food. Naturally, they ruin all of her food and leave her with nothing, so they have to go to the Thanksgiving festivities with nothing, but it's okay because a lot of other people did apparently. Right before they start eating, the Plymouth leader talks to one of the native leaders and thanks him for the peace they share with his people, which is insane, but that's fine. Then after they ate their food, they went back home. This is another one where not very much interesting stuff happens, and trying to pretend like colonial native relations were peaceful and calm is kind of an insane take, so yeah, not gonna rate it that high. And for our final book, we have High Tide in Hawaii. This one takes place, obviously, on Hawaii, and as soon as they get there, they see a party taking place close by. When they get there, they see two children who realize they are not from here and decide they should stay the night. In the morning, they decide they're gonna go surfing. They all try, but Jack is really bad at it, so rather than trying to get better, he goes on the beach, pouts, and reads his book like a little nerd. But of course, when he was reading the book, he found the signs of a tsunami, which is when the tide starts receding. This of course starts to happen, so he has to face his fears and run out in the water to alert the other three. They are all able to make it out of the water and get to high ground where they are safe. They are all able to make it home, and the last book of the Magic Treehouse original series is over. This one was pretty entertaining, actually. I really like Jack complaining, and the scene where he had to go and warn them about the tsunami was pretty intense. So yeah, here we have it, the final ranking for all 28 of the original books. Thank you for coming to my 100% completely objective ranking of all 28 Magic Treehouse books. If you have any questions or don't like my rankings, please do not tell me because I cannot handle criticism. So thank you so much and have a good day.